So hello everybody, my name is Josh, I'll be lecturing today. So the topic of today's session is going to be counterplay. I think a lot of people out there end up forgetting how chess is a practical game at the end of the day, and the important thing in chess is to try to make your opponent's life as hard as possible, because even if you lose, they'll feel bad when they win, and that's the important thing about chess. So now let's take a look at a game where I think that Black did a really good job of making sure that he was able to get counterplay, even when White had a fairly positionally dominant game. It would have looked like it would be a positionally dominant game just from the opening position. So let's take a look. So this is the game where Yuri Averbakh is playing White and Boris Spassky is playing Black. This is from the Soviet Championship in 1956. For those of you who don't know, the Soviet championships back then were often considered to be even stronger than a lot of the international tournaments, like the interzonals or the candidates or things like this. So let's take a look. So C4 from Averbakh. So we see a King's Indian. Spassky is a pretty aggressive player, so King's Indian makes sense. And of course, Averbakh is playing his own system with the bishops on E2 and G5. The idea here for White is simply trying to make some prophylaxis against the E5 type of thing, because the bishop on G5 makes it so that this type of counterplay would not be possible for Black on account of knight D5, with a really devastating double attack on F6 and C7. So C5 was played, which is actually still the main move today. But after D5, but here the move that Spassky chose is a little bit unusual, Queen A5. The more usual way for Black to play is to play something like H6 and then follow up with like a very fast E6, basically no matter where the bishop goes. And you'll end up with a sort of Benoni situation where the white bishop is not in an optimal square. So Queen A5, bishop D2. So Averbakh is just retreating and protecting the E4 pawn, A6, A4. So it's become very clear that Black is not going to be able to play B5, and therefore this queen excursion to A5 is probably not going to be the most effective way to proceed. So, and then Spassky decided to play E5. So back then, I think it would be a lot more common for Black to play with a really closed center like this. I think nowadays very few players would want to do so. As always, the engines will always hate Black's position here no matter what. I haven't looked at this game in some time, but I'm pretty sure that after White's next move, it's already like +2 or something like that. I think we can actually pause for a second and think about what White should play in this position.
Maybe move the knight in preparation of castling?
Yeah, so knight f3 is something like knight f3 would be totally normal. But Averbakh actually went for a different plan here, which I think is a little bit better. So let's think about, firstly, what does Black want to do in this position? So Black's eventual plan is that Black is going to be looking to play for F5, since that is pretty much Black's only available pawn break in the position. White has B5 covered way too well to do anything there. So Black will eventually try to move the knight and play F5. So Averbakh decides to go for prophylaxis against this with move G4, which nowadays we actually know is a very common way to meet this idea of F5. White plays for this against the King's Indian a lot of the time nowadays, either with a fast H3 or a fast bishop E2. So in any case, Spassky doesn't have another plan, so he just goes for knight E8, and we see a couple of moves. So the idea here is that White's not really so much interested in delivering a checkmate or anything like that, but just to close the position and eventually utilize the space advantage. So here G5, very nice move from Averbakh, and after Queen D8, Bishop G4, White is going to be able to trade off the light square bishops, which is definitely a positional goal for White in this pawn structure, with the pawn chains running the way that they do. So knight C7, takes, knight F3. And so in this position, Black is having a lot of problems. So to start off with, the Black bishop on G7 is more or less at a pawn status. It is not going to be able to contribute much to this game unless White, for some reason, opens the position. The knight on C7 is also not particularly placed in a great way. It's very common to put knight on c7 in the Benoni structures to prepare b5, but again, there's just no way that's going to happen. And so black has a pretty miserable position, and it looks like Spassky's opening has been a complete failure, and he's going to lose the final playoff against Averbakh and lose the Soviet championship. So in this position, Spassky decided to do something really interesting. So pretty much black has like two choices in this position. He can choose to shuffle pieces around and suffer until white makes some plan and opens the king side and wins. Or you can choose to play the move knight c6. So yeah, it's not a great choice given that we are giving up a piece for almost nothing. But this is a really interesting moment because in this position, if you show this game to a computer, the computer does not want to play knight c6. This position it thinks is only +5, and knight c6 thinks is +6. Unfortunately, this doesn't really matter for real life. Yeah, your opponent doesn't really care what number it is. Your opponent wants to feel safe. When you're winning, you want to feel safe, right? Everybody would prefer to win without the opponent being able to do anything, rather than be able to win some messy situation. So what does the move knight c6 do? Well, first of all, if white does nothing, we can jump into that d4 square, which is just absolutely beautiful. It's more or less the only good square on the entire board for any black knight. And then from there, it's going to be able to exert some influence over the position. Even then, it doesn't really do that much there, but it supports b5, and it's definitely annoying for white, takes a lot of squares away. But of course, the critical test for white's not going to just ignore it. White has to take the knight. So after takes. So now it looks like we've given away a knight for nothing. But the truth is that in giving away our b8 knight, we've actually significantly improved the knight on c7 by allowing it to go to this really nice square on e6. So from then, we can go into d4. And funnily enough, it actually turns out to be the white dark square bishop, which is a serious problem for white since it doesn't really have any reasonable squares on the board. And yeah, I mean, again, white is still up a knight, and so should still have a winning position. But this is very difficult for white to play relative to the previous situation just a couple of moves ago. So in a practical game, it's very easy to become uncomfortable with such things, and we will see how even Averbakh, who is probably one of the best players of all time not to make it to the World Championship, is able to end up making some mistakes here. So knight h4, very natural to put pressure on g6. Spassky decides to defend with queen e8. And after takes, we see queen g4. So Averbakh is playing pretty aggressively, but as stated before, with the black pieces where they are, especially the bishop on g7, it does seem somewhat unlikely that black is going to get checkmated. But the idea is not so much a checkmate, rather than white just wants to create pressure on the light squares. So rook b8, black's just simply developing the rook and creating pressure down the b file. The b2 pawn looks very weak right now. Another very nice consequence of our brilliant b takes c6. So Averbakh defends with knight d1. The knight on c3, another consequence of b takes c6. Knight on c3 doesn't have anywhere to go, so knight d1 makes sense. And from here we can see the knight jump right into d4. So rook h3, and so yeah, it's kind of funny how like just by removing the d5 pawn for white's position, all of white's problems are becoming exposed. So like here, for example, the c4 pawn is weak, which Spassky is able to take advantage of with queen f7. And suddenly, it's actually a little bit annoying to play for white. So Averbakh went for bishop c3. Bishop c3 here, having a key idea here to try to eliminate the knight on d4. At the same time, it's not really that clear how much white really wants to do that, since black would be able to gain a protected passed pawn on d4, and then have some somewhat mobile pawn mass with d5, and perhaps even opening up on that king on e1. But Averbakh has decided that he doesn't really want to deal with this knight forever, so he's gone for bishop c3. Rook e8, this move is a really nice piece of prophylaxis, because now if white takes on d4, then after e takes d4, the rook on e8 is already in the optimal position, and something like f3 would allow perhaps d5, and white's position is getting opened up probably a little bit faster than he would want. So we have simply rook h2, some prophylaxis to try to hold the second rank in the future. So we have queen takes c4, knight takes g6, and then rook e6. So this is a really interesting spot because white actually has played this game very well so far, and in this position actually can more or less deliver a checkmate by force. But the thing is that do I think like Spassky saw that white could like reach a winning position here? Probably, but that's not really the point. Like Spassky is down a piece. He is going to lose anyway if he doesn't try anything, right? So by doing this, he is forcing a lot of pressure on white because white now has a lot of pressure to calculate the winning sequence, which would start with rook h8. At the same time, it's actually not a trivial line at all. So we can just go through it together. But yes, the best move here would be rook h8 because after takes, king g7. So rook takes b8 is probably what Averbakh originally wanted to play and why he didn't end up going for this line. But the truth is that white is actually winning here. Even despite after f3, it looks like there's no way for white to prevent queen e2 checkmate, but white has the beautiful move knight f4, e takes f4, and due to the pin, queen takes f3 is now possible with winning position for white. Of course, later on, people figured out that this is actually pretty much a forced checkmate sequence, but it's a bit silly for me. Yes, so returning back to the game, we have bishop takes d4, which makes a lot of sense since it's simply much safer than what than the line with rook h8. So after bishop takes d4, but after rook takes g6, now black has not had to ruin the pawn structure, and a move like bishop c3 for white would end up dropping the e4 pawn. And then from there, black actually does have legitimately insanely dangerous compensation because the central pawns are going to be completely mobile. So like, for example, we could just take a look at bishop c3, takes, king f1, even something like d5. And this position is definitely not easy at all for white to handle. Again, this bishop on g7, although it's not particularly active here, it is doing an amazing job of holding h8. And so therefore, it's going to be really difficult for white to get in any sort of checkmate, whereas the white king turns out to be rather weak, and the knight on d1 is not contributing much to the game. So Averbakh has gone for queen f5 instead, which also looks very attractive. Since the rook is under attack, which allows white to force a trade of queens. And so, again, it looks like white is just completely winning, which might be true, but at the same time, black still is able to get a lot of counterplay here due to the nature of the center. So after d5, it turns out that the threat of the coming d4 and c4 can be extremely annoying for white to deal with. In particular, we can notice how this knight on d1 is just really bad, and it only really serves this purpose of protecting the b2 pawn, which is admittedly pretty useful. I mean, white does need to protect the b2 pawn, but yeah, it's definitely not in the optimal position. So we have f3, just protecting the e4 pawn. And now, so it's possible to start with d4, but Spassky actually went for rook b3. So first of all, just improving the position of the rook, and secondly, creating some pressure on f3. So now d4 is actually threatening to win that f3 pawn. So rook b3, rook h3. So it's never a good sign when you have to play rook h3, rook h2, and then rook h3 back. So yeah, anyway, rook h3 is forced to protect the f3 pawn. And again, it's possible to start with d4, but it's not 100% obvious that, that we have anything specific here. So Spassky decides to start with c4 instead, just to maintain some more flexibility in the position. King d2. And yeah, it's pretty clear that even though white does have the extra piece, it's definitely black who has the initiative here. So we can see after rook g6, white doesn't want to give up the g5 pawn, of course. So we see rook g1, d4, bishop a5. And yeah, suddenly I don't even think white even has an objective advantage anymore. The position is really tough now, which is amazing because it doesn't even appear to me like white has made any particularly obvious positional mistake or anything like this. But yeah, after bishop a5, we see that in this position, black doesn't really have too many other pieces to improve. Both rooks are in their optimal positions, and it looks like the black pawns are perfect, but we always go through worst piece first. And we know that since white does not have the battery on the h-file anymore, we are free to release the g7 bishop from its job of protecting h8 and bishop f8. So now if white moves the bishop from a5, we can have the potential to jump into b4, or c5 or something like this. We see Randy has suggested bishop f6 in the chat, which is probably also possible. Yeah, probably this is possible. I think that white probably is able to trade the rooks with rook h6 or something like this, and this is probably why Spassky didn't end up going for it, but definitely also makes a lot of sense. And this is probably also not super bad for black or anything like this, since we are going to be picking up the h6 pawn. And again, I doubt white has a big advantage, if anything at all. So bishop f6 would also have been possible. But bishop f8, I would say that with regard to practical chess, I think that somehow holding tension always benefits the side who is making the choice to hold it, since you're, it feels kind of uncomfortable to play against with the opponent like this, you know? So, and especially when you're down material, you don't want to be trading too much. So that's probably why bishop f8 was preferred. Rook g4. So, and now we have rook d6, just making that king on d2 feel just a little bit uncomfortable. And there are some potential threats of c3 to open up some files on the queen side. King c2, rook d7. So now Spassky is working on improving this rook, which wasn't doing too much on d6 or g6, now that white has protected the g5 pawn. And so now he just wants to double up on the b file and look for some sort of c3, d3 type of breakthrough. So g6, rook b7. Averbakh finally decides that his bishop on a5 is too bad where it is, so he just goes back to e1, c5, rook h4, bishop g7. And we can tell how uncomfortable Averbakh is with his position by seeing that he played bishop a5 in this position. So yeah, even here, if black were to play something like bishop f6 and just completely wait, it still seems like white is going to be having a good position here. Because at the end of the day, white is up a knight, and so with the king on c1, the idea here for white would be to shift the rook back to the second rank and perhaps look for some development of the knight in the future. Although it is admittedly very difficult for white to get into that sort of position. So yeah, it definitely would still be tough, but black should not be playing slowly in the situation when you're down a knight. So now in this position, Spassky decides that it is the time to go for the breakthrough with c3. So after pawn takes c3, at first it looks like there isn't really that concrete of a follow-up. The point is, after rook a3, black has two ideas here. The a4 pawn is extremely loose, and also rook a2 is going to be coming in with a powerful attack on the white king in the near future. So c takes d4. In this position, the material is not really the foremost of black's concerns, so c takes d4 would definitely not be right, and e takes d4 is important, so we just want to be adding some attackers to the game with our pawn on d4 and our new pawn on c4 coming very soon. Rook takes f4, we have rook a2, king d3, and rook b1, and suddenly it just looks like white is being completely swamped here, and after rook h1 takes, this position definitely seems to be extremely difficult for white. So king c2, rook b5, and Averbakh decides to go for a last-ditch effort with e5. So in this position, it is a bit difficult to choose from black's various good-looking options at this point. If black wants to play for to take the bishop, then there may be some e6 type of counterplay. And the right way for black to play in this position is bishop takes e5 and follow up with c4, and in fact to actually take none of the available pieces and to simply just keep pressing onward with the attack, which is a little bit hard to believe, but a very beautiful concept in chess at least. Instead, Spassky decided to go for d3, which also looks very attractive since we are picking up that rook on f4 on account of the discovery. But the problem is that, yeah, probably my guess is that Spassky wasn't really thinking about playing too hard for a win at this point. I mean, he has been down a piece the entire game. So after d3, we see a lot of simplification. And unfortunately, this position is not really possible to win, which I also found hard to believe at first since, well, it is in the exchange and a pawn, right? But it turns out that the white pieces are just way too active here. So suddenly it's been like a sort of flip of what's been happening the entire game, where where black has been the one down material in exchange for a great amount of counterplay. And now we actually have the complete opposite case where white is the one down material, but white has a ton of counterplay. And so after like a ton of moves, they eventually agreed to a draw. None of these moves are particularly important to our theme or anything like that, just kind of amusing that this is theoretically drawn. And we end up with this funny position where this is drawn because black does not have a way to activate the king past the 5th rank without giving up the b5 pawn. So yeah, basically I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to this move, knight c6, which ended up changing the course of the game entirely. I'd imagine that by the time Averbakh was in this position with knight f3, he was just thinking about how the game was probably going to feel pretty good from here. It doesn't really seem obvious how black can make any sort of counterplay, and yeah, and whenever your opponent is thinking about something like this, it's your job to make sure your opponent doesn't feel comfortable and that you want to create as many chances as possible. And it turns out that from here, Spassky was actually able to even outplay Averbakh and even reach a winning position at one point, although not without some help from his opponent, of course. But that's what chess is all about, you know. Nobody can win without help from their opponent. Okay, so let's move on to another game now. All right, so in this game in particular, this is a game that I played with black. And so I mostly want to bring the attention to one specific point in the game. So we can just quickly go through the opening moves, which I would say that I played pretty well for the first couple of moves, but then after that it got pretty bad very fast. So it looks like I'm achieving a lot in this sort of hanging pawn structure, but it turns out I've given up a lot of key squares. So in this position, I believe the right way for white to continue is with e4, and it's very unobvious to me how I should actually be meeting this sort of breakthrough on account of my various undefended pieces in the center. But knight b5 is also very attractive with this specific idea. Right, I believe that here is the moment when e4 is also strong. So, but after queen e5, we see white has gone for a really interesting sacrifice here with knight takes f7. So knight takes f7 is a really interesting move because I don't know about you, but in this position I didn't even see that move was legal. Like, he played it and I like jumped out of my chair, which is not ideal when you're playing chess. You don't want to be jumping when you're playing chess. So yeah, after knight takes f7, whenever your opponent plays a move that you don't expect, there's a couple of steps you need to go through. The first one, you need to determine what is the opponent's idea. So if they're sacrificing a piece, the first thing you got to think about is, all right, well, what is he going to do if I just simply take the piece? So what happens if black takes knight? So king takes f7, knight d6, so very natural check to fork the king and rook. But unfortunately for black, that is not all. Like, after a move like king g7, I would be very happy if white were to take the rook, and then I'm pretty comfortable here, given that I do have 2 knights versus the rook, which is generally a not unfavorable material imbalance. But white actually has something even stronger here with simply knight e8, and after king f7, capturing the f6 knight. And despite only being up a pawn, the central problem for black is that I'm going to be checkmated very soon, so this is not acceptable. So, and the other king moves, such as king f8, suffers from another problem, which is much more beautiful, I think. The simple queen e6 with a double threat of queen f7 checkmate and bishop takes f6, and it is not possible for black to defend against both threats simultaneously. So I realized, oh no, like, my opponent sacrificed a piece and I can't take it. So in this position, and obviously we can't simply leave it there. If it were white to move, white would capture the bishop on d8. Sorry, that's not what I meant to do. So in this position, white would simply capture the bishop on d8, and then there would be no defense along the long diagonal. So with black, it's very important to look for some resource that might not lose a tempo or something, and or perhaps an intermediate move is the right word we're looking for. So knight d7 is the only move here. But it still appears that black is losing, so it's really important to understand how to continue. So white obviously does not have the idea of just moving the queen away and dropping the knight. Again, knight d6 is possible, but but in this position, black is still able to gain the favorable material imbalance. And in fact, I believe black is even able to trap the white queen immediately with bishop c7. And I really don't think that my opponent, who is a strong IM of 2480, was going to play in such a way with that idea in mind. So knight h6 comes. And so now the key for black is to make the decision between putting the king on g7 or f8. So it is a somewhat difficult decision, since it looks like king g7 is more natural, as we're trying to create pressure on the knight. But there's a specific idea that black has in mind that is very important to understanding this position and is a little bit difficult to understand. So in the case of king g7, I believe white is playing queen g3 or something, and after king takes, there's some idea here. Okay, perhaps I should actually figure out what the idea is when I say it. I used to know, but it's been a while. I believe in the game I was most concerned about queen g5 actually, with the threat of knight f5 coming was the problem. So like most of the moves I want to play allow white's knight to escape through f5, and therefore I didn't really want to do that. There are also lots of threats for white involving e4, trying to open up the center, given that the white bishop is exerting a lot of pressure on the diagonal. So yes, queen g5 and following up with knight f5 would definitely be not what I was looking for. So the key here is to play the very awkward looking move king f8. And at first it doesn't look right for black at all. But the thing is that white actually has a big source of trouble on the queen side. So a move like queen f4, for example, actually allows black a pretty nice resource here with queen b8. And it looks incredibly strange, but after the exchange of queens, white doesn't really have a great way of saving the b5 knight without dropping the b3 pawn. I briefly considered this situation in the game, but I realized that the knight on h6 is actually completely trapped, so king g7 would simply pick it up here. And so this was actually the idea that led me to solving the problem in the game situation. So I had already seen what was likely to happen in the game when I had played king f8, but the idea is very important to know before going into it. So queen g5 is a more natural square for the white queen, since it doesn't come under attack by queen b8. But believe it or not, in this position, white's attack is actually not going to come to fruition like this, because the white knight on h6 remains absolutely terrible, and there isn't really a great way for white to free it here. So the key here for black, of course, we must act fast. So as with white to move, white would simply play something like knight g4, and the knight would escape, and we're left with a pawn down and a very bad king. So the key here starts with queen b8, and after takes, knight c3. Right, so this is the key position. I'm actually not 100% sure if my opponent had seen this in advance. But yeah, so we already know that the key for black revolves around this h6 knight being very weak. And so all of these moves prior had all been setting up for this move knight g8. And rather unbelievably, the white queen is actually not able to hold on to the knight no matter what, because of queen b8. So yeah, queen b7 here would not achieve the same effect, because in this position the queen would simply be free to go to f4. So yeah, unfortunately for me, I actually was not able to win, because white is able to pick up the c pawn, and then this is somehow drawn or something like that. But yeah, definitely a situation where I consider it to be a pretty decent feat of calculation here, and I think also a reminder of how important it is to stay calm when your opponent is doing something that you are not expecting. All right. Okay. So, all right. So this is a game which is a little bit embarrassing in actually several different ways. So in this game, I'm playing white against Bruzon, Lazaro Bruzon Batista, that is. Very strong player. He used to be over 2,700 and one of the best players in the world. So this was my second time playing him, actually. Or, yeah, it was my second time playing him. I've actually played him 4 times, and we've drawn all 4 times, but it's always scary playing against him, is what I'll say. So this game I'm playing white. So we have the Italian game, which I played pretty much all the time back then, knight of 6. So far everything looks pretty normal. A4 is a pretty normal way for white to handle the position as well. Simply preparing the A2 square as a retreat for the bishop. A5, C3. And here Lazaro surprises me with move king h8. So king h8 is normally associated with the idea of moving the knight to g8 and then following up with f5, which can sometimes be a good plan, but in my experience it's usually not that dangerous for white because black is undeveloping a lot of pieces and therefore opening the center is very strong. So knight b2, and I wasn't really that concerned about knight g8 here since I just felt, okay, so I'll simply play d4, and I think black is probably not going to play f5 here on account of the central weakening. But instead, Lazaro has chosen a better way to reroute the knight, knight d7. Insane Lonely Bear asks if I would prefer the Roy Lopez now. I don't really have a preference. I don't like playing against e4, e5. So let's just say that, sure, why not? So knight d7. Right, so okay, I figured, well, all right, black is still trying to play f5, so I would just play d4, knight b6, and then bishop b5. Okay, so this looks pretty nice so far. And after e takes d4, I developed some really clever idea, but unfortunately my idea was way too clever here. So at first, when I had gone into this position, I had thought about, okay, like I will simply take on d4, and after knight takes d4, c takes d4. Right, so naturally we would want to take on d4 with the pawn, but I thought after knight b4 or something like this, the black knight was going to be really annoying on b4, so I thought, okay, I should take with the knight instead. But I figured after c6 or something, and then black can even play like d5 here, and yeah, I just didn't really feel too confident in this position. Maybe white's a little better, maybe white isn't, but I just wasn't really too sure about playing into this pawn structure. So then I was thinking about, okay, well, imagine if I took on c6 first. Like after pawn takes c6, then I take on d4 this way, and I have my ideal pawn center. There's no knight b4. Black's definitely got some weak pawns on c6, which I'm going to be targeting with queen c2, and I'll follow up with knight f1. And my position, everything flows together very harmoniously. And so, yeah, I was definitely really excited to play into this, and so therefore I actually did take on c6. But unfortunately, I should have realized that my opponent, who is 2650 FIDE, is not going to simply let me do that. And when he took on c3, I was definitely not happy with what had happened, is what I would say. I think I was pretty upset here, and I think for like maybe 5 seconds I was thinking about resigning, but I don't think I can resign on move 12 as white. So I had to think about the best way to continue here. Of course, black's idea is that he is attacking both minor pieces, and it is not possible for white to move both of them away at the same time. And pretty much no matter what white is going to be doing here, black is going to be up with an extra pawn, since black has captured 2 pawns, and we have yet to capture any back. So in this position, the key here is that, so even though my position is really bad, and I figured I'm probably going to lose, again, we want to make the opponent uncomfortable, so we have to play in the best way possible so that our opponent finds the conversion difficult. So after pawn takes c3, we see, so I don't really want to take back on c3, since after takes c6. In this position, not only does black have that same extra pawn, black even has the bishop pair, and it's very unobvious to me how I'm going to continue playing with this pawn structure. My pawn c3 is not impressive, and black can simply develop this way, and if anything, black has won with the initiative after a potential f5 in the future, and I'm just not really too sure where to put any of my pieces. So definitely with white, you want to be preserving the 2 bishops here with bishop b5, c takes d2, bishop takes d2. So I figure, okay, well, if you're going to take my extra pawn, I might as well get some development out of it. So c6, bishop e2. I chose bishop e2 over bishop d3 because I was concerned about some d5 stuff, and I thought that I didn't want my bishop to be on the exposed d file when this happens. So I went for bishop e2. So my idea was to meet d5 with queen c2 and recapture on e4 with the queen. And from here I was thinking, okay, well, it's probably not like good for me or anything, but if anything, this is visually imposing. I feel like against a lesser opponent, maybe they'll just run into this sort of thing and perhaps lose quickly, and I'll be able to save some face. But unfortunately, Bruzon is not going to let that happen, so he starts with bishop f6. And in this position, bishop d3 is possible to start with, but after g6, black is actually threatening to win a decisive amount of material with bishop f5, which would cause me to lose my bishop on d3. So I decided to start with rook a d1, which is also very natural. Now, if black does nothing, I'm probably just going to take the pawn on a5 using the discovery. So black's going to have to protect it. He ends up starting with rook e8 just to get the queen out of the way. Because black doesn't really lose anything from doing so. And then continues with knight d5. So again, another very tough situation. We're down a pawn, and there's not really too much to do. So right now, my immediate problem is that this black knight on d5 is super strong. So I need to be able to figure out something that I can do against this knight on d5. So I've decided to remove it, even if I have to trade some pieces. So I've started with bishop c3, and after takes. So now at least I'm threatening c4. And on paper, at least, this doesn't look so bad, because black's queenside majority, well, he's got 3 pawns and we have 2. Unfortunately, usually here we would have a kingside majority there, but not possible in this case. But yeah, it's going to be very difficult for black to push these pawns, since black would need to do so with b5 at some point. But we have our a4 pawn here to stop that from happening with our bishop, and most likely we're going to have a knight on d4. So in this position, white is immediately threatening c4 to take advantage of this pin. So black moves the queen to f6, which is the optimal square, since it is putting pressure on the c3 pawn as well. Now, I definitely don't want to be playing c4, so I'll end up giving this b4 square to the black knight, where it's just absolutely brilliant here. And my light square bishop is definitely going to be suffering a lot. So we have knight d4. And so here again, I was kind of feeling like good. Probably a bit too eager, but I was thinking like, okay, well, black doesn't have any way to develop a bishop, so I don't even know how black should continue. But of course, he just plays bishop d7 and some regular moves. And I decided to go for queen b3, just making some pressure on b7, rook b8. And so now we can look at this position. So now we're just looking at this position, we can tell that most of white's pieces are actually placed pretty well. Unfortunately, it isn't in the cost of a pawn, which is not ideal. But so most of white's pieces are placed pretty well, but one of them is not really doing anything right now, and that piece is the bishop on e2. So I ended up going to f3 with the vain hope that he is going to let me take on d5. Of course, he's not going to, but the bishop is still improved on f3 no matter what. So takes. And Bruzon finds a really nice way to improve the knight with knight f4. So it turns out that the threat of the knight going to d3 is actually quite uncomfortable. So here I ended up playing rook b1. So rook b1 is simply just improving my rook and getting out of the way of a potential knight d3. But here, I didn't really take the move that Bruzon ended up playing very seriously, but after he played it, I realized that it was actually extremely uncomfortable to meet. So in this position, Bruzon played the move c5. So originally I was thinking, okay, well, this doesn't really look that impressive for black to me. It just feels like black's giving up the b5 square and exposing the b7 pawn. But the truth is that the positioning of my pieces makes it so that black has a lot of potential threats on the king side, such as with knight h3, since I will have to let go of the bishop with my knight. I believe knight b5 is not ideal because of associated tactics, so I ended up having to go to c2. But still, I was hoping, okay, well, if I can put knight on e3, maybe I can jump into d5 at some point, maybe even like knight c4 and target the a5 pawn at some point in the future. So yeah, I was still not super worried. Then he played bishop f5. And then I was thinking, okay, well, my knight's pinned, so that's definitely not ideal. So I have to move it away. Rook e1, knight d3. Yeah, unfortunately now from here, black's pieces all come together very nicely with tempo. Further proof that my opponent is a strong GM. Rook f1, knight d5, bishop d5, and now an excellent move c4 to secure that d3 square forever. So it looks like like I was doing pretty well, and suddenly I am not. But yes, after bishop d3, rook e1, queen d6, 93. So in this position, black was actually getting a little bit short of time, which is a really important factor that I feel like people don't really discuss quite enough. In standard games, particularly those that are around 90-30, time is actually a very serious factor, at least for me. And so it's really important that, like, when we get counterplay, another reason why it's so good to do so is because usually you're able to put your opponent on clock pressure. We always say that it's easier to attack than defend, and that's just another application of how that goes. So we have 93, then queen c5, and here I decided that I need to set a trick because black is going to play b5 pretty much no matter what happens. And if black plays b5, then the a4 pawn is going to disappear and the black a pawn is just going to be free to go, and we won't be able to do too much about it. So I decided to set a little trap here. So I'd start with h3 to just free up the back rank, since I know that's going to be a problem after the b file comes open. So b5 takes. All right, so here there's a really interesting crossroads, although it may not seem like it. Like if you looked at this specific position with a computer, you would actually never even know, because pretty much everything is about equally losing here in terms of objectivity. So in this position, my original intention was to play queen a2. And so this move, queen a2, I thought, okay, well, this looks pretty good actually, because I'm putting pressure on c4, and my pressure on c4 means that I'm threatening f4. And I'm also threatening to take on c4, since black has a back rank problem in the end. So a move like rook b3 would allow bishop takes c4, knight takes c4, and yeah, black's going to have to let go of one of the pieces here, although it looks a little bit strained. So okay, so I was thinking, all right, so that looks good. So how else can black protect the c4 pawn, since f4 is very important? Then I realized that black can actually solve the back rank problem and the threat of f4 in a single move, which is the move g5. And this move is very important for black. And then I realized after g5, I actually don't really have any way to get counterplay whatsoever. It looks a little bit odd for black to make the king to expose the king like this, but what I was realizing was that, yeah, there's just no way I can take advantage of my pieces where they are. My knight on e3 blocks my rook, but it's needed to protect my bishop, so I can't really rearrange my pieces in any way. And I figured that if this happened, most likely I was just going to lose, because I'm down the a pawn, and literally all of my pieces are worse than literally all of black's pieces. So then what I started thinking about was setting another trap with a different move, queen d2. And the trap here is that after queen d2, so unlike queen a2, this move doesn't actually have a super strong direct threat beyond the back rank. So black should simply play something like h6, because in the case of f4, there's no longer pressure on c4. So black can simply retreat with knight g6 or something like this. But if black does play g5, which he ended up doing because he was short of time, then after g5, black suddenly has a really serious problem. So g5 turns out to be a horrible move here, but so that's like another point that I want to bring up with. The point is to try to make black's life difficult, right? So queen a2, yeah, I know that black's going to see g5, and so after queen d2, most likely, or I shouldn't say most likely, but there's a solid chance that he'll just do the same thing, thinking that f4 is still a serious threat, especially with low time. So after g5, so why is g5 so bad? Well, the key lies with the queen being on d2. So as we just talked about with the queen on a2, there wasn't really a way to get the pieces in to attack the black king, since the, actually we can just go back to the position real quick. So there's no way to reroute the pieces to attack the black king, since we would need at least a couple of moves to bring our queen in and then move the knight somewhere, but the bishop will always be hanging when we do that. But in the case of queen d2, g5, Rob USCF does have the right idea with the move knight takes c4. So first of all, after bishop takes c4, now white takes an e5, and funnily enough, taking the bishop here would actually lose, because after king g7, black is getting checkmated by queen takes g5, which is very sad. So black needs to take with a knight, and of course I was not going to play queen takes d3, since here queen takes d5 is simply possible. And also rook e8 looks cool, but after rook e8, there is just king g7, and unfortunately we have not eliminated the d3 bishop, so black is able to just play bishop g6. And it looks like black is still winning. So the key here, when something doesn't work, is you try to figure out if you can flip the move order. So queen takes g5. And in this case, if black wants to play bishop g6, hoping to transpose to the previous variation, the important move for white is to start with queen f6 to prevent black from playing king g7, and then rook e8 will simply win on the back rank. So in this position, what black should play is queen f8 to just hold the back rank and prevent any of this rook e8 sort of nonsense, as well as hold f7. And in this position, what I was going to do was I was just simply going to repeat moves with queen g5, and I would have been very happy with that. After all, my opponent is not only much higher rated than me, but also I've just been down a pawn the whole game, and I'm very happy to have this lucky break. I believe actually queen d4 is supposed to be like maybe even like slightly better for white, but yeah, I was not going to be pressing my luck here. So yeah, in the case of queen f8, I would definitely have just repeated moves, no questions asked. And instead, on move 38, so 2 moves before the time control, Bruzon finally cracks with the move knight d6. And so here is a moment where I myself am rather low on time, and I did something that was pretty embarrassing. So in this position, I think it's definitely not the most challenging mate in 3 I've ever seen, to have rook e8, knight takes e8, queen takes f7, and queen g8. But unfortunately in this position I had like 5 minutes left, and I spent like 3 of them calculating the move queen takes e8, so I'm sure that you understood where I was at mentally at this point. So in the game I decided to just simply take on f7 first and play rook e8. So I'm just winning the queen here. And so I'm actually not up any material here. I have a queen and 2 pawns versus a rook and 2 minor pieces, which is very rarely a favorable imbalance for the side with the queen. But the problem for black is that the pieces just don't coordinate at all, since the knight is needed to protect the king. So even this position is still completely winning for white, even though I have just blundered away forced checkmate, which is kind of sad, which I actually didn't realize during the game. After the game, a lot of my friends came up and told me, like, did you see the mate? And I was like, what are you talking about? I didn't believe there was one, but yeah, chess is a hard game. So after king g7, so I figured, okay, I'm probably still winning here, because again, the black pieces don't coordinate, and black shouldn't be able to reliably stop the c-pawn. So in the game, Bruzon here went for rook b1, and then bishop c2, c4, a4, and yeah, so this was another step in my sequence of questionable choices. So after c5, a3, I'm not sure exactly what I missed, but simply queen a7 is very winning here, since black just doesn't have any reasonable way to continue pushing the pawn. If black wants to defend it with like rook b3 or something, then simply c6 is possible, and there's not really going to be any way for black to stop the c-pawn without giving up a minor piece. So instead, I decided to go for c6, and we reached this really bizarre spot with where we're going to be both promoting. I don't know exactly what I missed. I believe maybe it was that bishop g6 is a legal move in this position. But yeah, this was like after the time control, so there's really no excuse. We had already had time added to our clocks, and therefore there's no time excuse or anything like that. So definitely I should have been calculating better here. But yes, after queen g4, bishop g6, c8, queen. This is actually a situation where, I mean, it's not something you get every day, this material imbalance. So that was kind of nice to see. And this is definitely one of the most fun games I've had in my career. But this is definitely a place where white is the one who needs to be more careful, since after all, black is the one that is delivering the attack now. So Bruzon starts with h5 to sort of dislodge this queen on g4. Queen f4 is absolutely necessary, because otherwise the threat of rook h1 followed by king g3, queen e5 is extremely dangerous. So instead I went for queen f4 to prevent this. Rook h1, king g3, queen a3. Yeah, so everything here is definitely very, very scary looking. So for example, a move like queen f3 would actually be losing, since I would end up having to let go of my queen after something like king g4 and bishop h5. And this should be losing for white. So yeah, definitely a very risky situation, so I have to go for f3. Not a move I was super thrilled about for sure, since I'm exposing my king a lot. If black was able to move the queen to e1 in one move, I would actually just lose immediately, which is definitely not the ideal situation, of course. So queen a1. And unfortunately, the game now turns very ordinary very fast, since I will have to return my queen on, well, my c8 queen, sorry. I'll have to return my c8 queen to the defense of my king. And yeah, there's a situation where pretty soon I will have to trade the queens with queen ff6. Always fun to say that, so I'll try to do that as much as I can. So yeah, queen ff6, and so now I'm creating my own mate threats to force black to exchange the queens with queen e1, king f4, and then queen c1. Yeah, and unfortunately black is able to trade off the b2 queen, so after takes and g4. Yeah, so unfortunately, so I tried to press this for a little while, but the central problem for black, or for white rather, is that queen and a single pawn versus the rook and knight is not going to be enough to win. So all black really needs to do in this situation is to just keep the pieces tight and sacrifice the bishop for one of the pawns. So this is how it ended up happening in the game. And after rook g6, there's just not a reasonable way for white to break this fortress, since the threats to the g5 pawn are always going to be way too serious, and we ended up making a draw here. But yeah, so I think this is a really good example of how like playing in a resourceful way and looking for ways to trick your opponent or surprise your opponent when you're losing is a really important factor in getting the best practical results.
Well played.
Do we have time to do anything else in 4 minutes? Let's see. Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, so yeah, I think we can do like a bit of an exercise here. So this is from another game where I played. Yeah, so here we have a bit of an exercise. So, all right, so we have this position where it is black to move. So this was from a game I played in 2018, so I was not a GM, and I didn't even have any GM norms actually. So my opponent with playing the white pieces is Kamil Dragun, a Polish Grandmaster who I believe lives in the United States right now. He actually won the Polish championship in that year, so it's a very scary opponent. So in this position, I had no idea what I was doing in the opening, and I've just simply set up all the normal hedgehog moves while white has positioned all of his pieces in order to checkmate me. So definitely not the most ideal situation. So in this position, what I figured was probably going to happen is that, well, if I don't do anything, so immediately white is actually threatening g5, which would create a serious problem against the knight on f6. And unlike the normal hedgehog, I can't simply just play knight c5 or something, since there's a really well placed pawn on b4. So in this position, it is black's job to survive that. And so how should black stave off the attack? Maybe we can take some suggestions from the audience. Martin +2 suggests d5, which is definitely one of the ideal moves for black in the hedgehog. Unfortunately, we just don't have enough pieces behind it. White can simply play e5, and after knight e4, we're going to be dropping the d-pawn, and we're just going to be totally losing here. Yeah, and a lot of the other moves suggested are also sensible. Someone suggested king h8, which is possible, but this is definitely not one of the situations you're really happy with black for sure. Knight's on g8, black just doesn't really have any active play, and white can even continue with something like h4, and I find it very hard to believe that black is going to survive for very long. So h6 was a common suggestion, but after white plays h4, white is still going to be playing g5. But h6 is actually still fine as long as it has the same idea as the game, which features g5. So the reason I say that h6 is also fine is because after h4, g5 is still acceptable for black with the exactly the same idea. But the reason g5 is so strong is that the black king is not really becoming exposed here. And after f takes g5, we see knight e5, and in the game, I don't know why Dragun gave up the e4 pawn, but here I reached a better position and even won the game. But white should probably play queen d4, and I had already foreseen this position, and I thought this was definitely very unclear. It turns out to be relatively fine for black, but I didn't really think about this when I was in the game. So the reason that this move is interesting is because it actually loses by force to the move knight cd5, which I didn't really fully understand. I did believe that white was able to make some sacrifices because my king was so exposed like this. But the point is that this is actually not important to playing the move g5. The important thing is that in this position, just like with the Averbakh and Spassky game, as with the move knight c6, it doesn't particularly matter whether the move is engine best or whatever. The important thing is that you're turning a situation where you have no chances into a situation where you have chances. And I think that's probably about it for today. I would love to go through some of the details, but perhaps we don't have time.
Thanks, Josh.
You can go a couple more minutes if you'd like, whatever you need to do.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so it's very difficult to convince people that knight cd5 is winning by force, but the truth is that this position, white just has insane compensation. The problem for black is that there's just not really any reasonable way to stop this very slow maneuver, which will win the game. The majority of the black pieces, like the queen on a8 and the bishop on b7, are just completely not playing the game. There isn't really like a concrete lines here or anything like this to demonstrate this, but I didn't even have full knowledge of this in the game as well. So I guess you could say I'm perhaps a little bit unlucky, but it doesn't actually matter because if white has to find knight cd5, that's already a big step from this position where it just seems like we're losing no matter what. So again, another situation where g5 is not considered best by the engine at all, but I think g5 is the only, or perhaps h6 followed by g5 is the only real idea to stay in the game as black. And after f takes g5, knight e5, yeah, so queen d4 would be the challenging way to meet it, and there's actually a ton of moves for black. I was probably just going to play bishop f8, and I figured that eventually I would just rearrange the pieces like this, and realistically speaking, I actually have no idea what plan white is going for now, since the kingside attack has been completely stopped, and this knight on d5 is just an absolute rock. It's never going to be able to be moved by white. It turns out there's a lot of like funny computer lines. I thought this one was hilarious. So if white takes, there's a threat of knight takes f3, so black is able to pick up the h4 pawn. And so white needs to find knight cd5 or something, and there's some beautiful perpetual check. This is actually one of the only reason I'm bringing this up is because this is probably the most beautiful perpetual check I've ever seen in my life. But yes, after queen g6, king h8, queen h5, and the black king is not able to touch the g7 square thanks to knight f5. So black will end up having to agree to the perpetual. King f8, knight f5 is the same with checkmate. So yeah, so just wanted to show that. And after b5 is probably the best move with the idea c takes b5, bishop d8, which probably I didn't understand and would not have played. But yes, the idea of bishop b6 is very strong. So white would have to do something like this, and yeah, everything seems to work out for black, but none of these lines are really important. I would just play bishop f8 and just had a fairly normal position. So yeah, believe it or not, after f takes g5, the position is actually already not great for white. And what's interesting is that after f takes g5, my Dragun had actually offered me a draw, which I don't know if you are aware from practical experience, but when a highly rated player offers you a draw, that usually means that they're not comfortable with what they have. So even though the position was equal, probably he was already not feeling too great about the position. And so that's another key factor of playing in such a way where even though it's technically losing, it's really important to try to go for something. And my suspicion was confirmed when he played queen e2. After knight takes e4, the position is just simply good for black, and eventually I managed to win the game after some long adventures, which we don't have time for, but yes. All right, thank you.